Welcome back to America's Vote 2024. This is an extremely close presidential race. That's an understatement. It can all come down to who wins those key swing states. According to Decision Desk HQ, Harris is leading Trump in the battleground states except for Georgia. Joining me now is Chris Berg, the Vice President of Local Content and Nexstar Media Group, and Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science for Decision Desk HQ. Thank you both for joining us.
Hey, good to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Scott, I want to start with you. Who do you think gets the post-debate bump right here? We've spoken after all of these debates. What's your takeaway, and who do you think is going to get that momentum?
Well, interestingly enough, I think we're going to see the polls look like VP Harris won the debate, but I think a lot of these voters has already decided, so I'd be surprised to see any of these state-based polls move more than a point or two, which could be the difference, but I'm not expecting a 3, 4, or 5-point bump for either candidate after this debate.
And Chris, I want to get your takeaways right off the bat. What do you think of the debate tonight, and who do you think is going to come out of the debate after tonight with that momentum?
Oh my, I have so much to say about how this all went down tonight, especially on how it was ran by ABC. A couple of things for starters. Number one, kudos to the moderators. I thought they were very fair in how they managed the time. It's very difficult to go back and forth and try to keep on moving through the night. That's one of the hardest things to do when you're on the anchor desk. However, they are going to get beat up unmercilessly tomorrow by the Republicans because how many times they fact-check Donald Trump versus the fact checks with Kamala Harris. And that is going to be a point that will be beaten they'll be beaten up for the next several weeks. And one of the things that was very striking to me when it comes to how they managed the questions, there were at least 2 questions to Harris where on the immigration side where there was no follow-ups to her on her role. She did not answer really the question. Some of these questions were excellent questions, but there were no follow-ups. And when you build a debate, it's the follow-up question that really makes the moment in time, and they did not follow up. And with Donald Trump, when Kamala Harris mentioned, you brought the Taliban to Camp David, there was a perfect moment in time to say, Mr. Trump, is that true? Did you bring the Taliban to Camp David? And have that answer happen in the moment. That's what really, truly makes a debate special. And I think they missed moments in that point in time to kind of separate themselves out from other debates that are out there to get an answer to questions and bring additional knowledge to the public. A lot of talking points, not nearly as much kind of fact-based things that you hang your hat on in this debate as I would have liked to have seen.
Scott, I want to jump in here and ask you, I've been looking forward to asking you this question all throughout in the lead up to the debate. There was that New York Times Siena poll that came out that had a really interesting statistic. It said 90% of voters said they knew everything they needed to know about Trump, but a smaller percentage, 71%, said they knew everything they needed to know about Harris. She was pressed tonight on a lot of the issues, the flip-flops that she has made in recent years, and she sort of had to reintroduce herself. It was part of this reintroduction that she's been doing on the national stage, not as the vice president, but as the presidential candidate. Do you think that 71 number will increase after tonight's debate?
Yes, I absolutely do, especially if they watch the debate for at least 30 to 45 minutes. ABC did a good job of asking some of the big pressing questions in the first hour, things about why she switched her position on fracking, among other issues. Now, whether the voters like the answer or not, that's a different question. But look, the average voter only spends 5 or 10 minutes over the course of an election figuring out who they're going to vote for, and there was plenty of material tonight that they can choose from.
Chris, another question I want to ask you, one issue that we heard a lot about tonight was foreign policy, but polls have showed that that's really not at the top of the list for voters in some of these really key swing states, those areas where this election is going to come down to. What do you make of the dynamic, the strong focus on foreign policy issues, but sort of how it ranks in the importance of issues among some of those swing state voters?
Well, I kept track of all the questions tonight, and there were 9 economy questions, which ranks between 45 and 50% of the most important issue in every swing state. There were 10 foreign policy questions, and took about 10 minutes longer than the economy questions. And foreign policy questions are about 1% or less in interest for the swing states. So it was just stunning to me that they spent that much time knowing what the swing states really want to know about. A couple of things that I just also want to point out is that I was on the ground in Pennsylvania and in Michigan last week, and a couple of things that struck me. They are really in the know on the issues that are important to them. You talk to an average voter on the street, they are asking questions about what's important to them. And one of the things that kind of slipped through tonight was the very nuanced answer by Kamala Harris on her fracking position. We know in 2019 that she'd say she'd ban fracking, and she said tonight, as she said over through her surrogates and over the past couple of weeks, for the past 4 years, I've supported this position because that was Joe Biden's position, a guy from Pennsylvania. So I think a question that was one of the follow-ups that was missed, I think, is do you support the Biden position, or is that your position on fracking? And a couple of other just big picture issues that weren't mentioned that are important to voters. There was no question on housing affordability. That ranks as the second or third most important thing to voters in the swing states. Abortion's another issue that we spent 4 questions or 5 questions on in this debate. That ranks at 5 to 7% for voters out there. But a question about when it comes to the importance to the rest of democracy, we only had 2 questions on it.
Right.
And Pennsylvania is one of the largest senders of folks to Washington on January 6th.
Chris, let me jump in here.
It's important to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Let me jump in here because you mentioned Pennsylvania, and that's one of these key swing states that we keep talking about. Scott, I want to turn to you. It's been a crazy nearly 3 months of this election. The Biden-Trump debate, Biden dropping out, Harris coming in, Walz being selected, the DNC. I'm out of breath. Give us a state of the race right now. Where do things stand, and what is the status of Kamala Harris's momentum boost? Is that still there, or have things recalibrated to be a really close race?
Well, when we opened up our forecast, which is a quantitative look at the question you had, Harris had about a 57% chance of winning. Today, she sits at 55%, and that's largely due to some polls that look a little bit closer. The New York Times Siena one that you mentioned, some state polls in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Bottom line is the race is much closer than it was when it was Biden-Trump. And it's solidifying around basically a 50-50 race, which is about as close as we've had this century, if not the last over 100 years. Not since a Nixon-Kennedy race that was decided by a couple 100,000 votes and was down to the last state, Illinois, have we seen something this close. Any number of states and combinations, you could make the case for either Harris or Trump. The one thing I do know for sure is she's not going to run away with it 5 or 10 points, and neither is Donald Trump.
Close race, absolutely. Scott, we're out of time, but I have one more question I need to ask you. Coming here with some breaking news, Taylor Swift just said that she is going to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. It's a coveted endorsement for the Harris-Walz campaign. Do you see that affecting polls at all? She's a very popular individual, especially among young voters, and they're key this election.
They are key, and actually we have some data on this. You know, Taylor Swift in the 2016 election did a voter registration drive in Tennessee, and she increased voter registration by about 3.5–4% measurably, which, you know, not out of this world, but certainly measurable and could make a difference in a small state. Where I think it'll help the most, fundraising, especially if she goes out on the trail for VP Harris. Money means votes because they can go ahead and do the get out the vote operations in the closing weeks. And so, yeah, no, I think the endorsement will certainly help the Harris's operation, both in fundraising and potential votes in some of these close states.
All right, we have
one quick note there, though. She came out in 2018 and endorsed the Democratic opponent to Bill Lee in Tennessee, and Bill Lee won. So, you know, she definitely will help raise money, but it doesn't guarantee a Democrat to a victory.
Debate analysis with a side of Taylor Swift hot takes. Chris Berg, Scott Tranter, thank you so much for joining us tonight.